The first time it happened, I wrote it off as the wind. A gust whipping down the cul-de-sac in our pristine Arizona subdivision, sending my black Rubbermaid trash can clattering onto its side, spilling coffee grounds and eggshells across the manicured Bermuda grass. The second time, a week later, I thought maybe a coyote, desperate and nosing through the pre-dawn dark. But the third time, I saw her. Brenda Mueller, president of the Sunflower Canyon Estates HOA, age 62, with a helmet of frosted blonde, hair that didn't move in the wind, and a perpetual tan that spoke of long hours by her community-sanctioned kidney-shaped pool. I was up early, nursing a coffee and a looming deadline for a structural engineering report, when I saw her silver Lincoln Navigator slow to a crawl in front of my house. The passenger window slid down with a silent electric hum. An arm, tanned and jangling with gold bangles, emerged. A single manicured finger extended, hooked the lip of my trash can, and pushed. It toppled with a plastic crunch, its contents vomiting across the curb. She didn't speed away. She just continued her stately procession down the street. A queen, surveying her domain, leaving me staring, my coffee gone cold in my hand. This was the war that came to my doorstep. Not with a bang, but with the petty plastic sound of a knocked-over trash can. It started small, as these things always do. A friendly note slipped into my mailbox on HOA letterhead. Dear resident, please be advised that receptacle placement is in violation of Covenant 12, Section C. All trash and recycling containers must be stored from public view, except on designated collection days, between the hours of 6 p.m. the night before and 7 a.m. the day of. Your compliance is appreciated. I'd brought the can in by 7:05 a.m. that first time. 5 minutes. Brenda had been watching the clock and my property with the focused intensity of a hawk circling a mouse. The following week, a formal warning. A $50 fine for unauthorized flora. A vibrant, rebellious bougainvillea I'd planted along my front walk that didn't match the HOA's approved palette of desert beige and tumbleweed tan. The week after that, another fine, $200. My garage door, a perfectly serviceable white, had been deemed excessively faded and a blight upon community aesthetics. I'd pressure washed it the weekend before. The smell of her involvement was everywhere. A cloying mix of fake citrus air freshener from her SUV and the acrid scent of pure, undiluted petty authority. Every interaction was a masterclass in bureaucratic violence, delivered with a tight, frosty smile at the monthly community coffee meetings she held in her immaculate white-on-white living room. It's not personal, dear, she'd tell me, her voice the sound of crushed velvet over shards of glass. Rules are rules. They're what keep our property values high. They're what separates Sunflower Canyon from that. She'd always gesture vaguely east, toward the older part of town where houses had character and trees that hadn't been approved by a committee. My name is Alex Rojas. I'm a structural engineer. My world is one of load-bearing calculations, of understanding precisely how much stress a material can take before it fails. I design bridges and buildings to withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. But I had no blueprint for the slow, insidious pressure applied by a woman like Brenda Mueller. Her weapon wasn't force, it was a fountain pen on a violation notice. Her battlefield wasn't a field, but the meticulously regulated flower beds and paint swatches of our 7-block kingdom. The trash can became our Berlin Wall. Her weekly toppling was a statement. A reminder that my ownership of my home was conditional on her whim. I'd write it, clean up the mess, and feel the heat of humiliation on the back of my neck, knowing she was probably watching from behind her double-paned, energy-efficient windows. I tried reason. I caught her one morning as she was power-walking in a matching velour tracksuit, her sneakers squeaking on the damp sidewalk. Brenda, about the trash can, she didn't break stride. Covenant 12, Section C, Alex, it's very clear. If it's out past 7, it's a violation. The scavengers make such a mess. It attracts pests. She said pests while looking directly at me. It's out because someone keeps knocking it over before the truck comes, I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. She stopped then, placing a hand on her hip. Well, perhaps if you were more diligent in retrieving it the moment the truck passes, this wouldn't be an issue. Personal responsibility, Alex. It's the bedrock of a healthy community. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The bedrock of her community was apparently surveillance and spite. I'd seen the way she operated. Old man Henderson, a widower 2 doors down, got a warning for his wilting petunias. Brenda's own petunias, identical but freshly watered by her automatic sprinklers that ran for 20 minutes every single day in the middle of a drought, were always pristine. The rules weren't rules for her. They were a tool. Most HOA covenants include a good faith clause, requiring the board to enforce rules fairly and consistently. Selective enforcement, picking and choosing who to punish, is often grounds for a legal challenge. I'd read our 100-page covenant cover to cover. I knew this, proving it was another matter. My frustration was a live wire, sparking and dangerous. I'm a problem solver by trade. I don't endure chaos, I analyze it and impose order. But this was a different kind of physics. I needed data. I needed proof. So I bought a camera, a small weatherproof dash cam powered by a portable battery. Pack. I rigged it inside my front window, aimed at the curb. It felt ridiculous, a covert operation launched over a $30 trash can. But it wasn't about the can anymore. It was about the principle, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it all. The next trash day, I was a bundle of nerves. I put the can out at 5:59 p.m., a minute before the ordinance allowed. I felt like a criminal. At 6:02, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I'd have her. I'd take the video to the next HOA meeting and watch her frosty smile melt right off her face. I tapped the notification. It wasn't Brenda's Lincoln. It was a mangy, 3-legged raccoon, its eyes glowing in the infrared, currently winning a tug-of-war with a used pizza box from my bin. I slumped back in my chair, a laugh of pure frustration escaping my lips. Of course. The following week, I was ready. The camera was charged. I was caffeinated. The can was placed. The night passed without incident. Dawn arrived, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. 6:48 a.m. The garbage truck was 2 streets over. I heard its grinding whine getting closer, and then the silent silver Lincoln. Right on schedule. It glided to a stop. The window descended. The braceleted arm emerged, the finger hooked. The can went over with a familiar, pathetic crunch. The window rose. The Lincoln began to pull away, and my phone, in my hand, vibrated with a new notification. Motion detected. Video saved. Got you. I finally had her. The video was crystal clear. A perfect, damning portrait of petty tyranny. The license plate, the gaudy jewelry, the smug, satisfied glance she threw toward my house before driving off. It was all there. I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it was almost dizzying. Justice, served not by a gavel, but by a high-definition digital sensor. I marched over to Brenda's house, my phone gripped like a weapon. She answered the door wearing a silk robe, a look of mild annoyance on her face. "Alex? It's very early. Is there an emergency?" I didn't say a word. I just held up my phone and played the video. I watched her face. The annoyance flickered, then shifted to confusion, and then settled into a hard, flat mask of pure contempt. There was no apology, no shame, not even a flicker of embarrassment. She looked from the phone back to me, her eyes cold. "So, you're spying on your neighbors now? How very Orwellian." I was doing my duty. That can was a half-inch over the property line into the common area easement. That's a violation of Covenant 7, Section A. I was merely correcting the infraction. She was making up bylaws on the spot. The sheer audacity was a physical blow. My evidence, my glorious gotcha moment, meant nothing to her. It was just another rule to be twisted. "You knocked over my trash, Brenda. On video." She smiled then, a thin, bloodless thing. "And you've recorded me without my consent, which, as you'll find in the covenant addendum regarding community privacy, is a $500 fine. Your first violation notice for that infraction will be in your mailbox by noon. Now, if you'll excuse me, my coffee is getting cold." She closed the door in my face. I stood there on her pristine welcome mat, the sound of the deadbolt sliding, home echoing in the quiet morning air. The smell of brewing coffee and her floral perfume wafted through the gap in the door. I had come for a showdown and had been utterly, completely routed. I walked back to my house. The victory I'd felt minutes earlier, ashes in my mouth. I was an engineer. I dealt in concrete, rebar, immutable laws of physics. Brenda Mueller dealt in a different reality, one where she was the architect, the builder, and the sole inhabitant. Rules weren't laws to be followed, they were weapons to be wielded. The notice was in my mailbox by 11:47 a.m., a $500 fine for unauthorized surveillance of a community member. The video evidence, it stated, was inadmissible and obtained in bad faith. That was the moment the spark of anger turned into a cold, focused fire. She thought this was a game of petty fines and nastygrams. She thought I was just another homeowner to be bullied into submission. She was wrong. I couldn't fight her on her terms. I couldn't out-petty the queen of petty. I had to change the game entirely. If she wanted to use the rules as a weapon, I would study the weapon until I knew its every flaw, its every stress point. I would find the crack in her foundation, and I would press on it until the entire corrupt structure shattered. I went back inside, the Arizona sun beating down on my neck. I booted up my computer, not to work on my engineering reports, but to dive back into the Sunflower Canyon Estate's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. This time I wasn't just reading them. I was dissecting them. I was looking for the weak point, and that's when I found it, buried in a dusty digital addendum from 1998, a paragraph about non-conforming structures and community aesthetic harmony. It was vague, poorly written, a legacy clause from the original developer. But it mentioned something specific, something about permanent non-municipal fixtures, requiring a special permit from the Architectural Committee, a permit that had to be signed by the HOA president. An idea began to form in my mind. It was audacious. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely perfectly brilliant. It wasn't a solution. It was a trap, and I knew exactly what I needed to bait it. I got in my truck and drove to the nearest big-box home improvement store. I walked past the aisles of paint and flooring, past the gardening section with its approved HOA-friendly plants. I went straight to the back, to the fencing and masonry department, and I stopped in front of a pallet of 70-pound bags of quick-set concrete. The smell of dust and dried lime filled the air. I loaded 10 bags into my cart, the wheels groaning under the weight. Then I went to find a trash can, but not just any trash can. I found it in the outdoor section, a massive industrial-grade bear-proof refuse container made of galvanized steel. It was the size of a small barrel, with a locking lid and 4 bolt-down flanges on its heavy-duty base. It was ugly. It was indestructible. It was, without a doubt, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The cashier raised an eyebrow at my purchases. "Building a bunker?" he joked. I handed him my credit card. Something like that. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my garage, the door closed against the heat and prying eyes. The gritty dust of the concrete mix coated my throat. The sound of metal grinding on metal echoed as I drilled holes and test-fitted bolts. I wasn't just an engineer anymore. I was a general preparing for war. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my driveway, I stood back and looked at my creation. It was ready. It was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. It followed the letter of the law while completely obliterating its spirit. The next trash day was in 48 hours. I could already picture Brenda's face. She'd see it and think she'd won. She'd see a monstrous eyesore, a blatant provocation. She wouldn't see the trap. She wouldn't see the 100 pounds of concrete setting around its base. She wouldn't see the permit I had no intention of applying for. She'd see a challenge, and Brenda Mueller couldn't resist a challenge. I poured myself a whiskey, the ice clinking in the glass, the sharp, smoky taste a comfort. Let her come. Let her try to knock this one over. Let her fine me. Let her do her worst. The game had changed, and she definitely didn't see this coming. The whiskey was still burning a warm path down my throat when the first headlight sliced through the dusk. Not Brenda's Lincoln, a beat-up Toyota Tacoma, then a minivan, then another SUV. They slowed to a crawl in front of my house, their occupants gawking at the monstrosity now permanently bolted to my curb. My new trash can wasn't just a can, it was a statement. A 4-foot-tall, galvanized steel monument to defiance. By morning, it was the talk of Sunflower Canyon Estates. I sat at my kitchen table, the steam from my coffee curling in the cool air conditioning, and watched the show. The garbage truck arrived with its familiar diesel roar. 2 sanitation workers hopped off, took one look at the steel behemoth, and burst out laughing. One of them gave it a solid kick. It didn't budge. They shrugged, heaved the contents of the standard issue bins into the compactor, gave my fortress a respectful pat, and moved on. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark, my neighbor across the street. "Dude, is that a bank vault?" I smiled. "Anti-theft device. Brenda's gonna have an aneurysm," he replied. "Love it." The sense of victory was sweet, but short-lived. By 9:03 a.m., the official HOA envelope was in my mailbox. Not a fine. A summons. A hearing before the Architectural Review Committee for the installation of an unapproved, non-conforming permanent exterior fixture. The hearing was set for 3 days hence. Brenda wasn't just annoyed, she was marshalling her forces. She was playing her strongest card: bureaucratic procedure. The hearing was held in Brenda's living room. The air smelled of lemon pledge and thinly veiled hostility. The committee consisted of Brenda, her vice president, a nervous-looking man named Gary, who seemed to sweat constantly, and a woman named Carol, whose smile was as sharp and permanent as a tattoo. I sat on a white linen sofa that felt like a trap. "The issue, Alex, is one of community standards," Brenda began, her hands steepled on her glass coffee table. "That object is an eyesore. It does not conform to the aesthetic harmony we strive to maintain in Sunflower Canyon." "It's a trash can," I said, keeping my voice level. "Its function is to hold trash. It does that exceptionally well." "It's a structure," Carol corrected, her smile not wavering. "Any permanent installation requires prior approval from this committee. You did not seek approval." "I wasn't aware I needed approval to replace a household item," I countered. In many HOAs, the definition of a structure or fixture is intentionally vague, giving the architectural committee broad, often arbitrary power. The key is whether it's affixed to the land. My concrete base had just turned a simple can into a legal battleground. Gary mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "It's just so big, Alex, and so shiny." "The covenant specifies non-reflective surfaces for all exterior elements," Brenda said smoothly, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a page in the binder before her. She had it ready, tabbed, and highlighted. "Galvanized steel is highly reflective. It's a safety hazard. It could blind a driver." I almost laughed. The absurdity was breathtaking. "It's a trash can, Brenda, not a solar array." Her eyes narrowed. "Your flippant attitude is not helping your case. The committee is within its rights to demand its immediate removal and to levy daily fines until compliance is achieved. $100 per day." This was the squeeze. The legal vice. They would fine me into oblivion for a violation they themselves had manufactured through creative interpretation. I'd walked right into it. I'd given them a perfect, shiny steel reason to bury me. "I'll take it under advisement," I said, standing up. The meeting was over. I had lost. The next day, the fines started. $100 a day slipped into my mailbox each afternoon with the grim regularity of a death notice. I paid them. Every single one. I printed the receipts and filed them away in an expanding folder labeled Mueller. My anger had cooled, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. This was no longer a neighborhood spat. This was a structural analysis, and every structure has a critical flaw. I just had to find the load point that would make Brenda's empire of spite collapse under its own weight. I began my reconnaissance. Not with cameras this time, but with a cooler of beer and a pretext. I started with Mark, across the street. Then with Old Man Henderson, whose petunias were a perpetual source of HOA anguish. I helped him weed his flower bed, the dry Arizona soil crumbling under my fingers, the smell of baking earth and defeated plants thick in the air. "She's a piece of work, that one," he muttered, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled a weed. "Got me for my mailbox being the wrong shade of black." "Matte, not satin," she said. "Who the hell knows the difference?" The stories poured out. The young couple fined for a toddler's pink bicycle left on the driveway for 10 minutes. The family whose Thanksgiving decorations were deemed excessive and non-seasonal because they included an inflatable turkey. A pattern emerged. It wasn't just about the rules. It was about fear. Brenda's power was built on the universal anxiety of the suburban homeowner, the fear of losing equity, of being an outcast, of the dreaded violation notice. But I was an engineer. I didn't fear load. I calculated it. And I started to calculate the collective load of Brenda's reign of terror. My breakthrough came from the most unlikely source, the raccoon. The three-legged bandit returned, a phantom in the night. My fortress can was impervious, but the Martinez family down the street, who'd been recently fined for an overgrown Palo Verde tree that provided too much shade for their lawn, still used a standard plastic bin. The raccoon, intelligent and persistent, had made a spectacular mess of it, strewing diapers and empty yogurt containers across their xeriscaped front yard. I saw it from my window and went out with a trash bag to help them clean up. Maria Martinez was near tears, frantically gathering the mess as the sun rose. "She's going to fine us for this," she whispered, her voice thick with panic. "She'll say we didn't secure the lid. She's been looking for a reason since we complained about the tree." As I scooped up a handful of coffee-stained filters, my fingers brushed against something else in the grass. Not trash. A small, crumpled piece of heavy, expensive-looking paper. I smoothed it out. It was an invoice from a company called Desert Oasis Pools and Spas. It was made out to Brenda Mueller. The listed address was her house. The service rendered weekly chemical balancing and cleaning. The cost, $120 per week. I froze. The morning air, usually smelling of dust and creosote, suddenly felt charged. Brenda Mueller, the high priestess of water conservation, the woman who sent out weekly newsletters berating us for wasteful sprinkler runoff, had a pool service during a Stage 3 drought restriction. The hypocrisy was galactic, but it was more than that. It was a thread, and I was going to pull it. I started digging, not with a shovel, but with a keyboard. Public records, permit databases, county clerk, archives. I spent nights bathed in the blue glow of my monitor, the only sounds the hum of the computer fan and the occasional scuttling of a gecko on my stucco wall. I wasn't just Alex Rojas, annoyed homeowner anymore. I was a forensic engineer, and I was conducting a failure analysis on Brenda Mueller. I found the pool permit. It was old, from when the house was built, but the weekly service was a new expense. I cross-referenced the HOA's annual budget, a document so bland and tedious most residents used it as a coaster. Buried in the landscaping and maintenance line item was a recurring monthly payment to, you guessed it, Desert Oasis Pools and Spas, for community pond maintenance. We didn't have a community pond. We had a sad concrete catchment basin that held a puddle of brown water for 2 days after a monsoon. Misuse of HOA funds, even for seemingly small amounts, is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. It's often classified as fraud. If a board member uses association money for personal benefit, it's not just a violation, it's a crime. My heart started to hammer, a steady, rhythmic beat of pure discovery. This was it. The crack in the foundation. But I needed more. A single invoice and a budget line item were suggestive, but not conclusive. I needed the load to be undeniable. I began a wider excavation. I filed a formal written request with the HOA board, a right afforded to me in the bylaws, for all financial records pertaining to landscaping and maintenance for the past 5 years. Brenda's response was a masterpiece of obstruction, delays, obfuscation, heavily redacted documents. It only made me more certain I was on the right trail. I expanded my search beyond finances. I looked into the property records for every member of the architectural committee. Gary, the sweater, owned a rental property on the other side of town. A quick drive-by revealed an absolute eyesore. Peeling paint, a junk-filled driveway, a roof missing half its tiles. The same man who'd voted to fine me for a faded garage door. Carol, the smiler, had built a massive covered pergola over her back patio the previous year. I pulled the permit. It had never been submitted to the architectural committee for approval. Her own pergola was an unapproved, non-conforming structure. The hypocrisy wasn't just a character flaw. It was the operating system. They enforced the rules on us while living in a special, rule-free zone of their own making. I compiled everything. The invoices, the budget discrepancies, the photos of Gary's slum property, the permit records for Carol's illegal pergola. It was a mountain of evidence, a dossier of corruption. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction, the same feeling I get when a complex calculation finally balances. The structure was unsound, deeply, fundamentally unsound. I decided to force her hand. I applied for a permit. For my trash can. I filled out the elaborate multi-page form, attaching schematics, a crude drawing on a napkin, material specifications, big steel, and the required $50 application fee. I dropped it in the HOA's official suggestion box, which was, of course, bolted to a post outside Brenda's house. Her rejection arrived 2 days later. It was a work of art. Denied on grounds of aesthetic incompatibility, potential safety hazard, and failure to utilize HOA-approved materials and colors. She had taken the bait. She had made it official. Now I had her. Not just for the petty corruption, but for the specific, targeted harassment. She had denied my permit for a trash can, while her cronies on the committee had far more egregious, unpermitted structures of their own. The selective enforcement was now documented on paper, with her signature at the bottom. I was ready. I had the critical load calculated. I prepared my package. The financial records, the photos, the permits, the rejection letter. I was going to take it all to a full meeting of the HOA membership and blow the whole thing wide open. The night before the meeting, I was in my garage, making copies of the damning evidence. The smell of photocopier toner mixed with the scent of night-blooming jasmine drifting through the open door. I felt a calm certainty. This was checkmate. My doorbell rang. It was late. Unexpected. A prickle of unease went down my spine. I walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. A man in a suit stood on my porch. He was holding a large, official-looking envelope. He wasn't anyone I recognized from the neighborhood. His posture was rigid, professional. He looked like he served papers for a living. My blood ran cold. This was an escalation I hadn't anticipated. What now? A lawsuit? An injunction? I opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Alex Rojas?" he asked, his voice flat. "Yes." He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." He turned and walked back to a black sedan idling at the curb. I stood in my doorway, the heavy envelope in my hand. I tore it open. The document inside was titled Sunflower Canyon Estates Homeowners Association versus Alejandro Rojas. It wasn't a lawsuit over the trash can. It was a foreclosure notice. My eyes scanned the legalese, my heart pounding in my ears. It cited a bylaw I'd never even noticed, a relic from the original developer. It stated that unpaid fines, after a period of 90 days, could be levied as a special assessment line against the property. And if that lien remained unpaid, the HOA had the power to initiate foreclosure proceedings, my unpaid fines. The $100 a day I'd been faithfully paying. According to this, my payments had been improperly allocated to future compliance fees, and the original fines remained outstanding. The amount listed was astronomical, tens of thousands of dollars, a sum designed to be impossible. They weren't just trying to fine me. They weren't just trying to sue me. They were trying to take my home. The paper trembled in my hand. The sound of the sedan's engine faded into the distance, leaving me in a profound silence broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. The jasmine smell suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. I stumbled back inside, the foreclosure notice feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I looked at the dossier of evidence spread across my dining room table. My proof of their corruption, my surefire victory. It was worthless. They had bypassed the battle and gone straight for the nuclear option. They weren't playing by any rules at all. They had the ultimate weapon, and they had just fired it. My house. They were coming for my house. The cold, calculating focus I'd felt evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. I sank into a chair, the foreclosure notice crinkling in my grip. The game was over, and it seemed I had lost everything. The foreclosure notice felt like a death warrant in my hands. The paper, crisp and officious, seemed to suck all the air from the room. The numbers on it weren't just numbers. They were a calculated, malicious fiction designed to do one thing: erase me from Sunflower Canyon Estates. My home. The one I'd poured my sweat and sanity into. The fear was a cold, metallic taste in my mouth, and for a long, terrifying minute, it was all I could taste. Then, the engineer in me rebelled. Fear is a load. A dynamic, unpredictable load, but a load nonetheless. And any load can be analyzed, distributed, and ultimately, born. I spread the notice on my dining table, next to the damning dossier of Brenda's corruption. One document was a lie designed to destroy me. The other was the truth that could save me. I just had to build a structure strong enough to make the truth matter. I worked through the night, the blue light of my laptop my only companion. The foreclosure was based on a bylaw, a tiny, forgotten clause buried in the covenants. Bylaws could be changed, challenged, or invalidated. But to do that, I needed more than evidence of hypocrisy. I needed a legal sledgehammer. I went back to the beginning. The original Sunflower Canyon Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions, filed with the county in 1998. I'd read them before, but this time, I was reading them like my life depended on it. Because it did. I combed through every dry, legalistic sentence, every definition, every whereas and heretofore. The smell of old paper and dust seemed to emanate from the screen, a scent of forgotten history. And then, I found it. Not a bylaw. The mother of all covenants. It was a single paragraph, section 22.7, titled, Dissolution of Authority. It stated that any amendment to the CC&Rs that materially and adversely affects the property rights of a member, without their express written consent, could be deemed void. Furthermore, if the HOA board was found to be acting in a willfully negligent, fraudulent, or malicious manner in its enforcement, a petition could be brought by a simple majority of homeowners to force the entire board's immediate removal, and potentially dissolve the HOA's authority entirely, reverting control to the county. HOAs are not omnipotent governments. They are corporations, bound by their own founding documents and state law. Their power is contractual, not sovereign, and a contract entered into under fraudulent pretenses, or enforced with malicious intent, is not a valid contract. It's a house of cards. This was it. The load-bearing wall. Brenda's entire empire was built on the presumption of her authority. This covenant was the architectural flaw I could exploit, but I needed to prove willfully negligent, fraudulent, or malicious enforcement. I had the fraud, the pool service payments. I had the negligence, the selective enforcement. But malicious? That required intent. It required a pattern so egregious it couldn't be explained away as simple zealotry. The foreclosure notice was that pattern. It was the masterpiece of her malice. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed an army. Not of lawyers, but of neighbors. I didn't call a meeting. Brenda would have spies everywhere. Instead, I became a ghost. I made copies of my entire dossier. The financial records, the photos of Gary's rental, Carol's pergola permit, the pool invoices, and a simple one-page explanation of Covenant 22.7. I included a printout of my own foreclosure notice, highlighting the absurd manufactured debt. I packaged them in plain manila envelopes, and under the cover of a moonless Arizona night, I became a paperboy of rebellion. I slipped them under doors. I tucked them into screen doors. I left them on windshields of cars parked in driveways. I hit every house that had ever received a fine, every home that had ever endured a sniff of disapproval from the Lincoln Navigator. The only sound was the crunch of my shoes on gravel and the rustle of paper. The air was cool and carried the scent of orange blossoms from a tree someone had probably been fined for planting. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. The silence was deafening. Had I just made a colossal fool of myself? Would everyone side with Brenda, too afraid to rock the boat? Then my phone buzzed. It was Mark. Holy shit. Is this for real? Then a text from Maria Martinez. The pool money? I knew it. We're with you. Then, Old Man Henderson. Foreclosure? That witch. Count me in. One by one, the messages trickled in. A quiet, digital uprising. The fear was still there, but it was being slowly eclipsed by a rising tide of collective outrage. Brenda's power had always been our isolation. I had just connected us. The annual HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse. The air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and high-end perfume, a clashing mixture of the ordinary and the ostentatious. Brenda sat at the head of a long table, flanked by Gary and Carol. She looked triumphant, imperious, a queen holding court. She gavelled the meeting to order. "Old business," she announced, her voice ringing with false cheer. "We have, unfortunately, a serious matter to address. A member of our community has accrued significant violations and is now in a state of financial delinquency with the association." Her eyes found me in the crowd. They were cold and glittering. This was her moment. She was going to publicly announce my foreclosure. I stood up. Every head turned. I could feel the weight of their stares, a mix of curiosity, pity, and fear. "Before we get to that, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the stifling air, "I believe there's new business." A motion from the floor. She blinked, thrown off script. "This is highly irregular. The agenda is set. According to Robert's Rules of Order, which our bylaws adopt, a motion from the floor can be introduced with a second," I said calmly. "I have a motion. And I have a second." I looked at Mark. He nodded, standing up. "I second the motion," he said, his voice firm. Brenda's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Very well. What is this motion?" I walked to the front of the room. I didn't have a projector or slides. I just had a single copy of my dossier. I dropped it on the table in front of her with a thud that echoed in the silent room. "I move for the immediate removal of the entire HOA board for willful negligence, fraudulent misuse of funds, and malicious enforcement of the covenants," I said, my voice clear and steady. "And I have the votes to back it up." The room erupted in a wave of gasps and murmurs. Brenda's face went from tan to a blotchy, furious red. "This is outrageous! Slanderous!" "It's evidence," I said. I opened the dossier. I started with the easiest thing to understand. I held up the photo of Gary's dilapidated rental property. "Gary, you voted to fine me for a faded garage door. Is this your property?" He turned ashen, sweat blooming on his forehead like morning dew. I held up the permit for Carol's pergola. "Carol, you denied my trash can permit as an unapproved structure. Did you submit this for approval?" Her permanent smile vanished, replaced by a stunned O of surprise. Then, I got to the heart of it. I held up the invoice for Brenda's pool service. "And you, Brenda, you lecture us weekly on water conservation. You fined the Henderson family for overwatering their petunias during a drought. Why is the HOA, our HOA, paying for your weekly pool service under the line item Community Pond Maintenance?" I held up the budget page. "We don't have a pond." The room was dead silent now. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the ragged breath from the board members. This is a lie, a forgery," Brenda spluttered, her composure shattering. "The county clerk has the originals," I said, "and so does every homeowner in this room." I let that hang in the air. I saw the looks on the faces of my neighbors. The dawning comprehension, the anger, the betrayal. The fear was gone, burned away by the sheer audacity of the theft. "But the final piece," I said, my voice dropping, becoming quieter, more deadly serious. I picked up the foreclosure notice. This is malice. You manufactured a debt to take my home because I caught you breaking your own rules. You used the very same power we entrusted to you to protect our community to try and destroy a member of it." I turned to the room. "This isn't about my trash can. It never was. It's about all of us. It's about whether our homes belong to us or to her." I pointed at Brenda, who seemed to be shrinking in her chair. "I have a petition here, signed by a majority of homeowners. We are invoking Covenant 22.7. Your authority is dissolved. Effective immediately. I didn't have to call for a vote." It was over. The room exploded, not in anger, but in a cathartic, furious release. People were on their feet shouting, demanding answers. Brenda, Gary, and Carol looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Their reign of terror was ending not with a legal whimper, but with the roaring justice of a mob they had created. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The county intervened. An audit was launched. Brenda, facing embezzlement charges, resigned in disgrace. Gary and Carol followed. The foreclosure was voided. My fines were refunded. The new interim board, made up of people like Mark and Maria Martinez, voted to suspend all petty fines and review every covenant for fairness. A week later, I was pressure washing my driveway. The smell of clean water and wet concrete was a perfume of normalcy. The Lincoln Navigator pulled up. It wasn't shiny anymore. It was dusty. The driver's window rolled down. Brenda Mueller looked out. She seemed smaller, older. The helmet of hair was slightly askew. The tan seemed faded. We looked at each other for a long moment, the victor and the vanquished. There was no apology in her eyes, just a bitter, bewildered defeat. She looked past me at the steel trash can, still bolted proudly to its concrete plinth. "It's still an eyesore," she said, her voice stripped of its former power, now just a dry rasp. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "I know." She drove away slowly, for the last time. I turned off the pressure washer. The sudden silence was profound. The sun was warm on my skin. A hummingbird buzzed at the bougainvillea, its blooms a violent, glorious, unauthorized splash of magenta against the beige stucco. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification. A comment on the video I'd never intended to make but had edited and uploaded anyway. The clear, damning video of Brenda toppling my can, set to dramatic music, and ending with a slideshow of the evidence that had brought her down. The title was simple: How a Trash Can Took Down an HOA Tyrant. The comment was from a user in Florida. "My HOA just fined me for a pink flamingo. You're an inspiration. Taking them on next." I leaned against my indestructible trash can, the metal warm from the sun. I scrolled through the comments, a river of shared frustration and newfound hope from every corner of the country. They were stories of mailbox wars, of flagpole fines, of desperate fights over garden gnomes and the shade of beige. It was never about the trash can. It was about the 1,000 tiny cuts, the slow erosion of the simple joy of owning a piece of the world. It was about the Brendas of the world, everywhere, who confuse power with purpose and rules with righteousness. But a structure built on a flawed foundation cannot stand. It only takes one person to find the crack, one person to press on it. And then, the whole thing comes tumbling down. I looked out at my street, quiet now, peaceful. The war was over, and the bear-proof galvanized steel, unapproved trash can stood guard, a permanent monument. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a law book or a lien. It's the truth, a little concrete, and the courage to say, no more.